Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a special map called a proportional symbols map. It is the second bullet point for task 6 that you're being asked to complete. And if you're doing this in class, your teacher will have given you the base map that you need to complete this task using my instructions in this tutorial. However, if you're doing this from home because you missed the lesson, then you'll find that that base map is there and available for you to print off in the assignment, or you can ask your teacher when you're back in school for a copy of the base map. Now we're going to be completing this map in a similar kind of fashion as the map that we created for the choropleth or thematic mapping exercise. And you're likely, or you should have already completed a map that looks something like that on your screen, where you can have different shades of the same color to represent high, medium, or low values. In this case, we can see that square A4 has a dark shade, and that must be because in that square there's a high tourist score. There's a high amount of tourist activity going on. We can also see that down in the bottom squares, for example, in D1, according to this data, then we have a light blue score. So we have the other end of the shading spectrum. So it's the same color, blue, but used lighter. Now we're going to come back to this particular map later on when we look to describe and explain what the map shows. But the map we're going to create in today's tutorial is a little bit different. So instead of using colors, we're going to use the size of a symbol. And to simplify it, we're going to use squares. Now the first thing you're going to need is your pedestrian and traffic survey data from your field trip to St Andrews. And if you happen to be missing that data because you didn't gather on the day, then speak to somebody around you who will have it and fill out those boxes so you have the numbers. Now the first thing to do is to identify the values that you would consider to be high pedestrian scores. Now this can be for more than one square. You might decide it's going to be for maybe 5 or 6 where you see the highest values. Now I, for example, am looking at a student's pedestrian counts where they had quite a lot of values in the 50s. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 above the value of 50. So I've decided that my high pedestrians are going to be 50 and above. I might even write that down on my key so I remember that. I'm going to go with my mediums because I've got quite a few in the kind of the 20s and the 30s and the 10s. So I'm going to go from anything from 10 to 49 for my mediums. And for my low, it's going to be any square where there was less than 10. Right. That is less than 10 people counted. The next thing to do is to start with your first square. So for example, square A1, I can see, according to this data, that there were 20 people in that square. That means I'm going to want to draw a symbol that looks like this, that is the same as this size. So look at your map, measure the size of that square with your ruler, and then draw in square A1 a square that is the same size. Now what you might want to do to make it stand out is you might want to color it in. Now look across the map, and every square where the number of pedestrians counted was between 10 and 49, assuming, remember this, that 10 to 49 was the range that you've chosen, you want to draw a square that's that size. Now you're going to complete a similar thing for other areas. So let's take low. Now we might go for a different color. We can if we want. Advantage of using a different color in this situation, you could use a different shade if you want, is it just makes the small, the medium, and the large really stand out. So all my squares where I counted less than 10 people, once again, assuming that is, I've chosen that to be my cutoff, my 0 to 10. You might yourself choose 0 to 15 or 0 to 20. It really depends on the data that you've gathered, the numbers that you've got. Okay, and I would complete the rest of the map. I might put a little dot in each of the squares that I'm going to make that small square to help me as I plan. And then finally, you're going to do this for the largest ones. Now, I've chosen my range to be any square that had more than 50 people in the time we were counting. And I'm going to identify those squares and then draw a square that is the same size as the one in the key. By the time you've finished, every square in which we gathered data, remember there were some squares that we didn't gather data, so C4 and D4, and then the two blacked out ones, which are these two, are not likely to have any data in them. because there isn't actually anywhere to visit. So it's unlikely you're going to have had data unless you happen to have recorded it there. Okay, and you should have a map that finishes with a range of 3 different sizes of squares, and I should be able to look in any square. So for example, B1, and I can very quickly see that this must have been a square with a low pedestrian score. That was a few amount of people. So go ahead and complete the task.